My husband and his mistress planned to rob our company, so I hired her husband and took them down. If someone had told me that my husband, the man who once held my trembling hands under the moonlight and promised forever, would one day plan to steal everything I built, I would have laughed. But life has a way of humbling laughter. My name is Amara, and this is the story of how love blinded me, betrayal woke me, and silence became my weapon. When I first met Daniel, I was 26, full of hope and caffeine. I had just launched a small tech consulting firm out of a cramped office in downtown Lagos. Daniel was a banker then, ambitious, confident, with that disarming smile that made people trust him too easily. He didn't just fall in love with me. He fell in love with my fire, or so I thought. He used to say, "You're the kind of woman men fear losing, not because you're perfect, but because you make them want to become something better." I believed him. We married 2 years later, under fairy lights and soft jazz. My parents said I was lucky. My friend said I'd finally found peace. Even then, I remember my grandmother whispering during the wedding, "Be careful of a man who studies your strengths too closely. He might be learning how to use them against you." I smiled then, thinking she was just being dramatic. But looking back, that was the first warning I ignored. Our company, A&M Innovations, grew faster than we imagined. We started it together, Daniel and I. I handled the creative and client side. He managed the finances. It was a perfect partnership, or so it looked from the outside. Inside, cracks began to form. At first, it was little things. Daniel coming home late, saying the meetings ran long. His phone, once left lying around carelessly, was now always face down, locked, silent. He started dressing differently. More cologne, new suits. That quiet swagger that men get when they're hiding something they think makes them powerful. But what broke me wasn't the cheating. It was how ordinary it all looked. Love doesn't shatter like glass. It decays like fruit, slowly, quietly, while you keep telling yourself it's still sweet. The first time I saw her was at a business dinner. Vanessa. She was everything Daniel admired. Sharp, charming, perfectly groomed. She had just joined a rival firm as a consultant. He introduced her as a client contact, but I saw the way her eyes lingered on him, the way his laughter came a second too easily. When I extended my hand, she smiled, the kind of smile that women reserve for each other when they already know something you don't. I told myself not to overthink it. After all, paranoia ruins good marriages, but truth doesn't care about politeness. One night, months later, Daniel fell asleep on the couch, his phone buzzing with a new message. I wasn't the kind of wife who snooped. I never needed to. But that night, something in me moved before I could stop it. The message read, "Tomorrow's plan is set. Once the transfer clears, we'll disappear. I'll handle Amara." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. My name. My company. Disappear. My body went cold. At first, I thought it was a misunderstanding, maybe a work project. But the longer I scrolled, the clearer it became. Hidden under folders, emails, and coded notes was a blueprint, an actual plan. Daniel and Vanessa weren't just sleeping together. They were setting up fake accounts, forging contracts, and siphoning money out of our company. Everything I had built, every sleepless night, every sacrifice, they were going to steal. And the cruelest part? They were going to leave me with nothing but shame. That night, I sat in the dark for hours. The city outside my window pulsed with life, unaware that my world had just ended quietly in a living room full of lies. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break things. But I remembered something my grandmother once said. When a snake shows you its skin, don't rush to cut it. Watch where it sheds, that's where it's weakest. So I watched. And planned. And waited. Because if betrayal had taught me anything, it was that silence is not weakness. It's preparation. It's strange. How betrayal doesn't break you all at once. It breaks you in patterns. Like waves on a shore, pulling away pieces of who you were until you no longer recognize your own reflection. For weeks after I found those messages, I lived like a ghost in my own home. Daniel would kiss my forehead every morning before work, tell me he loved me, and I would smile back, rehearsed, mechanical, hollow. Every "I love you" became an echo in a house built on deceit. I started recording everything. His late calls, his sudden trips, the way his laptop screen dimmed the moment I walked in. But I said nothing. Because silence, I realized, makes guilty people comfortable. And comfortable people make mistakes. I began to notice patterns. Vanessa's firm wasn't just a competitor, as it was a funnel. Small transfers, joint projects, contracts that didn't quite make sense. Each one connected, like veins leading back to the same poisoned heart. I documented everything. Every date, every alias, every cent. But as I gathered proof, I also felt myself crumbling. There were nights I sat on the bathroom floor, clutching my knees, whispering prayers I no longer believed in. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the infidelity. It was the insult and that they thought I wouldn't notice. That the woman who built a company from scratch could be so easily erased. Sometimes I'd stare at Daniel while he slept beside me, and I'd ask myself, when did love turn into this quiet war? Then, one afternoon, fate decided I had mourned enough. I was leaving the office when a man approached me in the parking lot. Tall, well-dressed, eyes heavy with a kind of sadness I instantly recognized. "Mrs. Daniels?" he asked softly. "Yes?" He hesitated, then handed me a small brown envelope. "I think we need to talk." Inside the envelope were photographs. Daniel and Vanessa, holding hands at a cafe, laughing like teenagers. But one picture made my throat tighten. It was taken at my company retreat. The woman I'd hired as a consultant had been the snake I'd welcomed into my garden. I looked up at him. "Who are you?" He gave a sad, almost embarrassed smile. "Vanessa's husband," he said. "My name is Mark." We sat in his car for hours that evening. Rain tapped softly against the windshield, like the sky was listening too. Mark told me everything. He had suspected for months, late nights, coded messages, the same look of guilt I'd seen in Daniel. He had followed her once, seen them together, and taken the photos for proof. He wasn't angry anymore, he said. Just tired. I thought maybe if I ignored it, it would end, he murmured. But people like them don't stop. They only move on to bigger sins. We sat in silence for a long time after that. Two strangers connected by the same wound. "I think they're planning something bigger than an affair," I said finally. He looked at me, surprised. "What do you mean?" "They're moving money. My company's money. Slowly, quietly. It's fraud. And if I don't act fast, I'll lose everything." Mark leaned back, processing my words. "Then maybe we can help each other." It wasn't revenge that sparked between us that night. It was recognition. The realization that we were both survivors of the same storm, standing at its eye, too broken to run, too strong to fall. Over the next weeks, Mark and I became allies, secret, careful, methodical. We met in quiet cafes and parking lots, our conversations cloaked in whispers. He was a systems engineer, good with networks, encryption, and tracing digital footprints. Together, we mapped out Daniel and Vanessa's operation, step by step, transaction by transaction. Every discovery felt like peeling back another layer of deceit. Emails hidden under aliases, private accounts in Dubai, business documents altered in code. They had been planning this for months, maybe longer. And I had been financing my own betrayal. But amidst the chaos of investigation, something unexpected happened. For the first time in months, I felt calm, focused, powerful. It's ironic. Betrayal had stripped away my illusions but returned my purpose. Mark and I worked like soldiers on a silent battlefield. We shared stories of our marriages, the early love, the gradual rot. He never pitied me, and I never pitied him. We were equals, two wounded people turning pain into precision. Sometimes he'd look at me across the table and say, "You know, you don't talk like a victim." And I'd smile faintly, because I'm not one. The night we found the final piece of evidence, I remember feeling a strange stillness. Daniel and Vanessa had arranged an offshore transfer scheduled for Friday. If successful, they'd drain nearly 80% of our liquid assets and vanish. Mark traced the route. I secured the recordings. Everything was ready. But revenge, I realized, wasn't what I wanted anymore. I wanted justice. Poetic, public, undeniable justice. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction. It's revelation. From that night on, my days became performances. Every morning I smiled at Daniel like a dutiful wife. Every evening I kissed him goodnight, pretending not to taste the lies on his lips. But when he left for his late meetings, I met Mark. And together, we turned pain into strategy. Mark was brilliant, the kind of mind that could turn chaos into clarity. He showed me how Vanessa and Daniel were routing money through layered accounts, fake vendors, shell firms, even fake employees. Each one tied back to a dummy corporation registered under a foreign name. "They're confident," he said one night as we studied the data. "Too confident," I nodded. "Because they think love makes us blind." We didn't rush. We let them believe they were winning. Each fake transaction they sent, we mirrored it, tracking, recording, building a digital maze that would trap them the moment they tried to cash out. But this wasn't just business. It was emotional excavation, because every file, every signature, every whispered password was proof that the man I'd loved had been plotting not just against my company, but against me. Sometimes I'd stare at his name on a document and feel tears sting my eyes. Mark would notice and say quietly, "Don't break now." Not yet, and I didn't. Weeks passed. The plan grew sharper. We created a decoy transaction, one big enough to tempt them. A fake partnership deal with a major investor. I presented it to Daniel one morning over breakfast, acting excited. "It could double our Q3 revenue," I said, handing him the file. He skimmed through, his eyes lighting up in that familiar way, greed disguised as ambition. "This is huge, Amara," he said. "I'll oversee it personally." Exactly what I wanted him to say. Behind the scenes, Mark built an invisible firewall. Every move Daniel and Vanessa made toward that deal would be logged, traced, and time-stamped. Every message between them, every draft, every transfer attempt, silently recorded. We even coordinated with my trusted legal advisor and a quiet contact in the financial crimes unit. No alarms. No noise, just patience, because revenge, I'd learned, doesn't always need fire. Sometimes it only needs evidence. And timing. One night, as we sat in Mark's car reviewing data, the city lights flickering over our faces, he asked, "Do you ever think about what comes after?" "After this is over?" I stared out the window. "I think about silence," I said. "Not the kind that hurts. The kind that heals," he nodded slowly. "You deserve that." "So do you," I replied. Our eyes met for a moment, not romantically, but with that unspoken understanding that only shared suffering can create. For the first time in months, I didn't feel alone. Finally, the day came. The transfer was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Thursday. The same morning, Daniel and Vanessa were flying to Dubai for a business retreat. I went into the office early, wearing my calm-like armor. Daniel came in an hour later, humming to himself, wearing that expensive cologne I used to love. He smiled, kissed my cheek, and said, "Wish me luck, baby. This deal's going to change everything." He was right, just not in the way he thought. From my office window, I watched as he and Vanessa left together, laughing, confident. Their betrayal walked hand in hand, oblivious to the storm behind them. The moment their car disappeared from the gate, I called Mark. "Ready?" I asked. "More than ready," he said. Within minutes, the trap activated. The fake transaction Daniel approved sent a silent alert to our legal servers. The money trail led directly to the fraudulent accounts. Accounts in their names, traced, recorded, documented beyond denial. Every action they took online that day was mirrored and stored. Every message, "We did it. She'll never find out. See you at the airport," was saved. By evening, the financial crimes unit had everything. But we didn't stop there. That night, I sat in my living room waiting. Daniel came home late, grinning like a man who thought he'd beaten life itself. "Good news," he said, loosening his tie. "The deal's complete. We'll be celebrating in Dubai next week," I smiled gently. "That's wonderful. I'm proud of you." He poured himself a drink, still talking, still pretending, still unaware that the empire he thought he'd stolen was collapsing beneath his feet. For the first time, I didn't feel pain. I felt peace. Because betrayal loses its power the moment you stop needing the betrayer to change. 2 days later, the investigation began. Quietly. No arrests yet. Just murmurs, emails, frozen accounts. Vanessa panicked first. Her husband, Mark, played his role perfectly, pretending to be oblivious, comforting her as she spiraled. Meanwhile, Daniel came to me, frustrated, confused. "Something's wrong with the accounts," he said. "Funds aren't clearing." I feigned concern. "That's strange. Maybe the bank needs verification." Inside, I was calm, because the verification had already begun. And it wasn't the bank asking questions. By the end of that week, I was no longer just the betrayed wife. I was the silent architect of their undoing, and as the storm gathered above them, I didn't gloat. I simply waited for truth to do its work. The morning the news broke, I was in my office, calm, composed, ready. The headline flashed across every major finance outlet: corporate fraud scandal, CEO couple implicated in international scheme. Their faces were everywhere. Daniel's smug grin, Vanessa's perfectly staged smile. Side by side, the world now saw what I had known all along. The board called an emergency meeting. The Financial Crimes Unit arrived at our headquarters before noon. And by 1 p.m., Daniel's access cards were revoked. He stormed into my office like a hurricane in a suit. "Amara, what the hell is going on?" he barked. I looked up from my desk, unbothered. "I was about to ask you the same," I said, sliding a folder toward him. Inside were printed emails, transaction screenshots, and copies of messages he'd sent to Vanessa. His hands shook as he flipped through them. This is fake," he stammered. "You're setting me up." I stood. "No, Daniel. You set yourself up." "I just stopped pretending not to notice." He clenched his fists. "You think you can destroy me? You wouldn't have this company without me." I stepped closer, my voice steady. "I built this company before you ever came along. You just wore the suit while I did the work?" He glared, jaw tight, then laughed bitterly. "You won't survive this without me." I met his eyes. "Then it's a good thing I already did." At that moment, 2 officers entered the room, followed by our legal advisor. "Mr. Daniel Attawale, you're under investigation for financial fraud and embezzlement," one officer announced. Daniel turned pale. "Amara, tell them this is a mistake. You can fix this." I looked at him, the man who once held my heart like it was fragile, then crushed it without blinking. "I did fix it," I said softly. "Just not for you," he shouted as they led him out, his voice echoing down the hallway. Every employee turned to watch. The same people he used to intimidate now saw the truth unfold like a movie, and I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just breathed, deeply, freely, finally. Later that evening, I received a message from Mark, a photo of Vanessa sitting in a police van, head buried in her hands. The caption simply read, "Justice delivered." I stared at the photo for a long time, then typed back, "Not justice, closure." He replied, "Then let's close this chapter properly." That weekend, I walked into my company's annual gala, alone, radiant, unbroken. The press surrounded me, flashing cameras and shouting questions. "Mrs. Attawale, how did you uncover the fraud? Was it true your husband and his mistress worked together?" I smiled gracefully. Let's just say, betrayal teaches you to read between the lines. The audience applauded, but my mind was quiet. Not empty, peaceful. Later, on the terrace, as the city lights flickered below, Mark joined me. "We did it," he said, handing me a glass of champagne. I nodded, gazing at the skyline. "No, you helped me believe I could." He smiled faintly. "What now?" I looked up at the night sky, clear, endless. Now I build again. But this time, with eyes wide open, the crowd inside cheered as my name was announced for the Businesswoman of the Year award. I walked back in, shoulders high, every step echoing strength, because the best revenge isn't rage. It's grace after they expected you to fall. Amara stands on stage, trophy in hand, her expression calm and powerful. The lights gleam on her face, not in triumph, but in quiet victory. A single tear escapes, not of sadness, but of release. She whispers under her breath, "They broke my trust, but I rebuilt myself."